About a month ago here on the channel, we took a look at the B450 Steel Legend from ASRock, and that was on the AMD side of things, where the board had everything you'd want from a board at a good price point. The bling, the audio, the NIC, USB 3 ports, everything checked out, except it wasn't really intended for overclocking. The Steel Legend on the Z390 series wants to stick to that trend, coming in with $145 USD MSRP. The Aussie price tag, I will update that in the description, and is slated for a June release this year. Though of course, as with every motherboard here around Tech YES City, we're going to take it through all the paces for you guys. I'm going to be testing it out with a 9900K, and even though ASRock informed me not to really overclock it, I'm still going to do just that and give you guys the details. So straight away, going over the VRM details, they're using Nichicon 12K caps, as well as SMD 60 amp chokes, a PWM controller that consists of the UP9521, and then for low side MOSFETs, they're using Sinopower 4336 40 amps, and then on the high side, Sinopower 4337 35 amps with a 6+2 phase power design. The heatsink itself is actually a smart design, covering the input and output on the top-down look, and also providing heat dissipation for the VRM on the 6-phase side, delivering power to the CPU. Testing this out with a 9900K with stock settings showed the VRM to go up to about 55 degrees on the heatsink, then about 84 degrees when we had the IR camera on board. This was using up about 95 watts, 4.3 gigahertz. This was in a 27-degree ambient controlled environment. However, when we did step it up to a manual overclock of 5 gigahertz, which does juice a lot of power, going up to around 190 watt CPU draw alone, we saw the VRM throttle the CPU after about 4 minutes without a fan over the VRM and the heatsink. Though surprisingly, once we added a 120mm fan over this VRM, the temperatures then went down, even at 5 gigahertz, drawing double the power at 74 degrees on the MOSFETs and 43 degrees on the heatsink. So you can see how much of a difference adding that 120mm fan on budget Z390 motherboards can make a big difference. So with the VRM, it's just as ASRock states, it's not really intended for overclocking, though if you do want to overclock, don't forget a decent fan and have it placed over that VRM. However, things get a lot better when we move over to things like the onboard audio, where they're using the realtek ALC 1200, and although it's not the 1220, it did post some very impressive figures, since everything along that onboard audio line is very good, the caps included, and we saw a roll off here of only 0.2 decibels from 10 hertz to 20 hertz, and then underneath that 1.6 decibel roll off. So it's going to be great for powering mid-range headphones and still giving good clarity in the bass. The rest of the frequency response was pretty flat, very good numbers, and then looking at the crosstalk figures, even at 100 volume level, we saw the crosstalk going under 80 decibels at full volume. So these were impressive numbers across the board on the output, though. When it comes to the audio input, that's your mic input, we saw again some pretty good numbers when I tested the mic in at full volume, 30 decibels. It was showing a little bit of noise, so they weren't using noise suppression, but when we dropped that down to 80 volume, even at plus 30 dB, the noise was virtually non-existent. So basically, if you want to get into streaming on a budget, you've already got a microphone and you don't need noise, or not that much at all, then this is going to be a great starting mic out port. Moving on to the onboard NIC, the speeds here were very consistent, staying at around 108 megabytes per second when I was doing a consistent file transfer across my network. USB 3 speeds checked out, with my SSD maxing out at 367 megabytes per second. However, on the rear input and output, they are indeed changing that terminology, and we'll quickly go over here. At the top, they've got the option to mount an M.2 Wi-Fi key, which is in the middle of the board, and then below that, you've got USB, I know it is originally 3, but now it's called 3.2 Gen 1, and then down below that, you've got USB 3.2 Gen 2, which is originally USB 3.1 Type A and Type C. They're basically getting speeds of 10 gigabits per second, double of that of USB 3. And then you've got USB 2 ports, 2 of those as well, if you wish to maybe do a Hackintosh build and you need that USB 2 support. You've got your 7.1 manual out as well as an optical out. And then besides that, you get a PS2 hybrid and also display and HDMI outs too. Though going through the rest of this motherboard, it's standard ATX size, though on the side there is like a edged cutout that's a sort of a stylish look to go with that camo paint job on the board itself. You've also got M.2 armor at the top and bottom, where one of those M.2 ports is PCIe Gen 3 4X speeds. Then you've also got an M.2 which supports SATA connectivity. Testing out temperatures with the M2 armor does indeed not only add to the aesthetics, but also helps keep the temperatures down on those precious SSDs. And it's especially a good thing if you want to do video work with a motherboard like this. Though now other things I do like about this board is the 4 SATA ports and also 2 down the bottom for cable management options, as well as the USB 3s. You've got 2 of those, 1 at the side and also 1 down the bottom. Then you've got 2 12-volt RGB headers and an addressable 5-volt, which can run through the actual BIOS, so you don't need to install any software. In the BIOS itself, you've got the polychrome RGB option to control the RGB with some new effects, although there was a typo in there. But besides that, the BIOS works really well. It's your typical ASRock BIOS with easy mode and advanced mode, all the features you'd want for overclocking, and even the option to update the BIOS itself via an RJ45 internet connection. Though lastly, in the BIOS itself, you've got different overclocking profiles and the fantastic tuning software, which works really well. It's really simple to use, and you've got 5 PWM controlled fan headers on the board itself, 1 up north, 2 in the middle, and 2 down south. And then lastly, RGB LEDs are all underneath the right-hand side of the motherboard, as well as underneath the chipset heatsink, which is located towards the south of the motherboard. So now we've gone over everything with this board, it's time for the conclusion with the Z390 Steel Legend. And I think it's hit all the marks that ASRock intended it to hit. And that's basically if you're not into overclocking, but you want everything else at a pretty good price point of 145 USD, then it definitely does hit the mark. Of course, if you want to get a 9900K, go crazy with overclocks, and I'd suggest stepping it up to something better. From ASRock's own lineup, they've got the Taichi. But also on that note, if you don't want to overclock and you want to get a fancy water cooler, you want the RGB, you want that camo aesthetic, really good onboard audio and everything else that just really checks out with this board, then I can give it the all okay around here. Though one thing I will critique was I'd possibly like to see maybe Thunderbolt added in, as I know there are people out there that want to get Thunderbolt as cheap as possible and still want to get bling bling. So that would have been about the only thing really to critique about this board, but other than that, the aesthetic looks really good, and I do like it how they've laid out the options with the USB front outs and also the SATA ports. So they're thinking about cable management in modern builds, and the RGB, you can control that within the BIOS itself, as opposed to some other RGB software, which can hit performance even to that of 2% on a high-end build on your CPU. That's with things like the iQ and also Asus's software. So it was nice to see the BIOS controlled chipset that doesn't affect performance whatsoever. Anyway guys, that's it for the Z390 Steel Legend from ASRock. If you guys enjoyed this review, then be sure to hit that like button. Also, let us know in the comment section below, do you think it is a legend at its price point? Yes or no? Love reading your thoughts and opinions as always, and I'll catch you guys in another tech video very soon. Also, if you're enjoying the content around here, sub button and the bell button, they're down there somewhere. And also, if you want the inside scoop, check us out on Instagram, Tech YES City, and I'll catch you guys in another video very soon. Peace out for now. Bye.